Get out. If you can't beat 'em, join 'em. Disclaimer. This video, which depicts my personal, educated, and researched opinion, in no way promotes any race over another. In fact, I promote all races and all children of God, which is inclusive to every single human being on earth. We have been lied to in many ways, and deciphering truth can only come from God, and only when we surrender our bias, emotional beliefs, and prior programming. In praying for God's truth, wisdom, and discernment, He has shown me connections and paths I could have never fathomed. I am sharing those with you again today, and we are going down the deepest, most mind-bending rabbit hole I've gone down to date. Open your hearts, minds, bodies, and spirits to the truth, and know this: if anything I say here today does not speak true for you, then I pray God strikes the words and images from your mind. If you're still ready to embark, then let's begin. And welcome back, patriots, friends, followers, and foes. Today we go back to the Garden of Eden. Imagine the possibility that in the garden there were many garden people, and not just Adam and Eve. Envision all the continents were connected at this time, putting people in the same general area of earth, all one race, one color, one collective people of God with immortality. Enter the serpent. At some point we know there is corruption and defilement of the garden people, what we refer to as the fall. In this scenario, the bite of the apple was far more than the literal story written in Genesis. Genesis is telling us more with the story of the forbidden fruits, in my opinion. It is possible this is the first time we see a fallen angel come to earth to tempt and to lie with a human woman. Upon partaking with this fallen angel of light, the woman convinced her partner, a man, to join in this defilement against God. They were deceived by the serpent, and now believed God had hidden these things from them, and they now felt they deserved to enjoy these forbidden fruits. Because of this corruption, the two bloodlines were born, one of Cain and one of Abel. As we know, these bloodlines battled, and the bloodline of Cain sought to end the bloodline of Abel. Because of their unending corruption, God cast out the bloodline of Cain to cross the hot desert sands up to the Caucasus Mountains, where they were roped away for many years. Upon leaving the garden, Cain's bloodline struggled to travel by foot over the hot sands, so Abel's people helped them out by camel. This is important to the Freemasons, as I will mention soon. Over time, the people of the Caucasus Mountains became more adapted to the higher, thinner air, their skin lightened greatly in color, and more hair grew on their bodies for protection against the colder climates. These are those that we would come to know as Europeans. Many would eventually slowly migrate back toward Africa and Egypt specifically. This is not to say that all light-skinned races are of the corrupt bloodline of Cain and all dark-skinned races are the chosen bloodline of Abel. All of humanity was corrupted in the fall. No one gets out alive without the blood of Jesus. However, there is a lineage and bloodline from Cain that is very specific, that is important to Luciferians for the coming of the Antichrist. It is my belief that this is a further corrupted fallen angel bloodline that is specifically Rh negative. And so, if all of this is remotely true, it is easy for me to see that the importance of bloodlines goes back further than we might have previously imagined. The Boule refer to themselves as the inner circle of the entire black race. What we know today is that in order to be a part of this upper echelon elite society, one must have been a high-ranking member of one of the fraternities of the Divine Nine, and must also at some point become a devoted Freemason. The Prince Hall Masons were created in 1784 by the black community when they were not allowed to join the original Freemasons. 14 men felt so compelled to be part of this elite secret society that they asked the Freemasons that if they would not allow blacks into the original Freemason society, could they create their own. Prince Hall, one of these 14 men to start the first ever black Freemasonic secret society, named the Masonic group after himself, which is clearly very narcissistic on his part. The major difference for the Prince Hall Masons and the original White Masons is that any Mason of color is only allowed to reach the 33rd degree, while the White Masons are allowed to reach 33 1/3 degree. Recall earlier when I said the travel of the Cain bloodline by camel to the Caucasus Mountains would prove importance later on? It is a secret way in which Masons test new prospects. When a prospect arrives to his first introduction to the Freemason Society, he will be asked, How did you arrive here, by camel or by foot? If the candidate does not answer that he arrived by camel, he is immediately disqualified. If Cain's bloodline was not forced out of Egypt to the Caucasus Mountains and needed the help of the Abel bloodline to get them there by camel, then why would this be an important inclusion in their initiation? Each Boule member is required to join as a lifetime member to the NAACP. I mention this just as a side note because there's so much connection and involvement. And there's a lot to how the NAACP started and how they control the Black community, while masquerading as an organization that is for its Black community. The history and details of that will have to wait for another video. For now, I want to get into the history of the Black Greek. Boule itself is a Greek word meaning advisors to the king, which begs the question, who is the king? Another question I'm led to is, have people of color ever been Greek? Why is there a need and desire to create an organization amongst themselves that has seemingly nothing to do with who they are, where they came from, and clearly no connection to their own beliefs and ancestry? So why are there Black Greek collegiate organizations? And how on earth did the Boule organize and become the controllers of the entire American Black community, essentially through these? First, we need to ask, who were the Greeks? I could spend a great deal of time talking about many specifics of the people of this time, but the basic thing to know is the Greeks were certainly not of African descent. In my educated and researched opinion, they are split off from the original Cain bloodline from the Caucasus Mountains. It comes as no surprise when we see the culture for which they loved and pushed. The Greeks were overwhelmingly homosexual and were openly involved in pederasty and pedophilia. There are plenty of quotes from well-known Greeks, and the artwork of the time depicts exactly this rampant sick behavior. In fact, women were only there for breeding purposes, and older men with the most young boys were considered the most affluent. Knowing this, we must press the question even more. Why would any man or woman of color want to identify as Greek when it is not their ancestry, nor is the behavior we should want to display? It should be known that the people of Greece once hijacked the people of Egypt. Greeks came into Egypt and conquered the African people that were thriving in knowledge and technology. The Greeks had to have this knowledge as their own, so they did what the Cain bloodline has been doing since the garden and continues to do today, hijacking. They stole the Egyptians' knowledge, technology, philosophies, gods, and humanity. They created their own gods and mythologies based on precisely Egyptian gods and mythology, and led the world to believe it was they who held the intelligence and philosophies that history tries to make us all believe to this day. It would seem we have another killer bee situation on our hands, as the Greeks' lifestyle and ideals would cause massive chaos and destruction eventually. The Greeks became known as the intellectual, philosophical peoples that would influence the world over. They would change the truth of history, having us believe Egyptians were light-skinned and that their Greek knowledge that pushed new ideas and technology came from themselves and was by no means stolen from the African people. The plan from then on was to keep the Africans and the African nation from ever rising up again. Marcus Garvey, born in 1898, was an African-American Black nationalist leader who was a proponent of the Back to Africa movement in the United States. He would urge American blacks to be proud of their race and preach their return to the ancestral homeland, Africa. To this end, he founded the Black Star Line in 1919 to provide steamship transportation, and the Negro Factories Corporation to encourage black economic independence. Marcus Garvey attracted thousands of supporters and claimed 2 million members for the UNIAACL, that is, Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Community League. Obviously, Marcus Garvey had to be stopped. He would ultimately suffer a series of economic disasters that were clearly pushed upon him, and in 1922 he was arrested for mail fraud of all things. Garvey served as his own defense attorney at his trial, was convicted, and went to prison in 1925. He was never able to reignite the vision after prison because, of course, he was never going to be allowed to. The Boule needed their community right here in America under their thumb and mind control because back in their home country of Africa, the Rockefellers and Rothschilds and whatever other bloodline connections had already dug their tendrils into the African nation and had ownership over gold, silver, and diamond mines. Marcus Garvey had said, "What's good for the Rockefellers is good for the African people," and that the black community should return to Africa to mine their own precious commodities. There is no way the Illuminati bloodlines controlling Africa's commodities, precious metals, precious stones, and trade with the world were ever going to let the Africans have their nation, culture, independence, and creative potential back. Fast forward to today, where we have Boule control in every aspect of our nation: politics, Hollywood, music, sports, news media, social media, and any other sort of influence you can think of. We understand to a degree that the monarch mind control programming is in effect over most, if not all, these people that get anywhere in this industry. I say we understand to a degree because it never ceases to amaze me when I learn more about the stranglehold the Boule has on its community. It's all connected. When I remember how Wendy Williams had an episode back in October 2018 during her Halloween special, where she dressed up of all things as Lady Liberty, and trust me, there are many significances here not lost on me, but I simply can't take the time in this video to cover them all. Watch here.
Williams, dressed as Lady Liberty, faints on live TV.
Our first caress.
And suddenly collapses.
You can see the look of sheer terror on her face. The narrative would say she became overheated and fainted. However, this look of absolute terror was one that was quite familiar to me. Solve et coagula. What does this mean? From Zviad Slavinsky. Quote, long before quantum physics, alchemy pointed to its most important operation, solve et coagula. Solve or solutio refers to the breaking down of elements, and coagula refers to their coming together. In the process of transmutating base metal into gold or arriving at the philosopher's stone, this contains both literal and hidden meaning. Esoterically, solve referred to the dissolving of hardened positions, negative states of body and mind, thereby dissolving and vanishing negative energetic charge. Coagula referred to the coagulation of dispersed elements into an integrated whole, representing the new synthesis. Solve et coagula expresses transmutation from base to a finer state, the perpetual goal of spiritual growth and human evolution. Thus, in the widest meaning of the term, solve means dissolve, disperse, dilute. Coagulate, by definition, is to gather or form into a mass or group. So the real meaning of these words, solve et coagula, is the formula that the alchemists used to effect the transformation. It could be described as a process where something is broken down to its elements, a process which produces energy that compels reconstitution into a purer form. The same meaning we find in well-known scientific terms, analysis and synthesis. We first break something down into its parts and then make a new, better, or more acceptable whole. As a result of this process is the release of energy. Even in some particular occult systems, we find this realization. For example, in Thelema, Aleister Crowley speaks of the duality of Nuit and Hadit. Nuit is the goddess of the infinite space, meaning the wave, and Hadit is the point, which means the particle. End quote. This is not the way I look at this, of course, but Mr. Slavinsky wants to lean toward what he thinks is a positive spiritual way of seeing transmutation. Solve et coagula means dissolve and coagulate. It means that something must be broken down before it can be built up. An interpretation of this saying is to dissolve the body and build up the spirit. Solve et coagula is seen on popular images of Baphomet on the goat god's arms. Solve is on Baphomet's right arm with a hand pointing up at a crescent sun, and et coagula is on Baphomet's left arm with a hand pointing down towards the moon. Transmutation seems to be the breaking down of the human soul that inhabits the body, all originally created by God in order to make space for an eventual full demonic possession. As more of the original human soul is broken apart, as we see in the shattering and alters of the mind programming of MK Ultra and monarch mind control, the more room there is for demonic possession, until one day there is nothing but a remnant of the original human soul that, on occasion, attempts to surface and take back control. I believe this is what we saw with Wendy Williams in her Lady Liberty costume. It was not an overheating fainting spell, but the human soul which lives in the sunken place, and existing in constant terror, attempting when possible or when triggered to come to the surface and beg anyone it can find to please help. Usually, the human spirit is never allowed to surface, and this poses a problem and threat to the demonic inhabitant, as the possessor must remain in control. After Wendy Williams' fainting spell, she became somehow too sick to continue her show and was rushed into a treatment center. The narrative tried to blame Graves' disease and some things about her husband cheating, but the Graves would certainly explain a few things about her eyes bugging out, her emaciated body, and possibly could explain the episode on Halloween. However, Graves' disease is hardly something that has to be managed from a treatment facility, and it is rarely an ongoing problem once diagnosed and treated. More likely than not, her human soul had tried to resurface, and reprogramming was in order. Once the slaves in America were physically freed legally after the Civil War, there came a need to learn how to control the slave mentally. The best way to keep them enslaved is to get them to decide, well, if you can't beat them, then join them. Mental slavery certainly is most central to roping and corralling the freed slave to not just want to take on their oppressor's culture, but to beg to be a part of it. We saw this with the Prince Hall Masons, and we see it still today with the fake way out for the Black community by way of free college and the Black Greek collegiate organizations. Meanwhile, we don't see Black communities rising up out of the slums in droves to have independent businesses and success. On the contrary, the more they go to college, the less they seem to get out of poverty. Another, less noticeable way is to keep the Black people comparable to animals. We see it in today's movies, such as Black Panther, and in the early TV days with Bosco, and we see it in the music industry today with people like Jay-Z and his J-Bo character. J-Bo is a harmful, simianized, hominoid, global mass commercial Black Negro caricature. J-Bo represents the half-man, half-human animal like the Black Panther. It is a higher primate, half-simian monkey or great ape hominoidea orangutan, not unlike the ape man, M'Baku, and the great white gorilla cult of the Black Panther movie associated with the Congolese Black Africans. The idea that the various human races were created independently by God or evolved from separate ape-monkey ancestors has its origins with 18th century French intellectuals, for example, Voltaire and Cuvier, who divided humanity into civilized Caucasians or whites, created by God, and barbaric Negroes or blacks derived from the monkey tribe. Not long ago, there was a poll conducted that showed that most Americans are more apt to believe blacks come from apes than any other race. Why would this be necessary at all still today in these supposed tolerant times and push for the welfare of the Black community? Well, because it subverts people into a subconscious belief that the Black community are not people, but merely unintelligent and less creative animals who need to be controlled. For if they were to have true independence, they would be savage and destructive animals, which ironically is what their controllers are causing in and of itself. The Black community is being destroyed now from the inside out. I've seen the subconscious bias against the Black community in my own personal experience, merely researching and sharing this subject, as I'm either not believed or I'm simply called a racist. I was told the Boule is probably fake news, this coming from a self-proclaimed secret society expert. All it takes to find out that the Boule is real is a 2-second internet search on the words Boule Foundation. Why people call me racist and behave as if I'm personally offending them, and most certainly refuse to look at my work or anyone else's on the subject. If no one wants to know about it, and no one wants to hear about it, how will we ever bring the change we say we so badly want? If we want to destroy the enemy, but we refuse to see all who are the enemy, then we are only cutting off a few heads of the Hydra. The subject of the Boule truly is either the least cared about of the Illuminati control, or just simply the least known. I believe it is largely both. This subject being the least covered, the least cared about, and the least known is exactly why it is working for the enemy. The bloodlines are important, far more important than the name Rockefeller, Windsor, Rothschild, or Vanderbilt. Far greater importance than the Pessour, Merovingian, Astor, or Bundy. Far outweighing Collins, DuPont's, or Freeman. This is something far older and far more specific. The importance lies in the blood of Cain.